like, you're such a good friend that I freaking never talk to, you know? Like, you know, I guess that exists now.
There are friendships in life that the good news about them is, I don't want to say they're low maintenance, but you can always pick up where you left off and not be offended.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Franks and Books. I'm Andrew Franks.
This is Carl Jones. I almost forgot my name.
And we're here tonight with Jacob Stokes. Jacob actually...
Hello.
Yeah, hey, thanks for coming. Jacob has a podcast, which I'm going to let him talk about more later. It's actually the only podcast I listen to.
Wow.
Right. So, good for him,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Good
I
for
mean,
him.
I appreciate it.
Tell us a little bit about what Redstarreviews is, how it started.
Okay. I love books. I've always loved books. I mean, it can go all the way back to when I was a little kid. I basically learned how to read so I could read The Lord of the Rings. Because when I was a little kid, my parents had these amazing copies of The Lord of the Rings that the covers just left me like, wow, these are incredible. And I asked them what the stories were, and they said, well, when you can read, you can find out. So that was A, mean of my parents, B, genius of my parents, because then I went ahead and learned how to read so I could tackle Tolkien. I've always loved fantasy and science fiction specifically. And I always wanted to be a book reviewer. Like, I always thought that was just cool. You know, I know a lot of people grew up wanting to be an author. And yeah, sure, I'd love to have been an author. Mostly, unlike Andrew, I write fractured fairy tales. I can write the very beginning. I can kind of write 3/4 of the end, but I can't get that middle part done. So I gave up on writing, still loved reading. And so I'm like, well, I want to express my love of books and communicate with others about it. So I just decided to take the plunge about 9 or 10 years ago and just create my own book review website. And so, of course, you have to brand, you know, because you got to be on Instagram and Twitter and all the social media. So I was like, okay, what should I call it? And I had no idea at first. And it took me a while. And actually, this goes back to, we met back in 1999. Before we met, I had actually spent about 3 weeks over in Russia. And we have a mutual acquaintance, you know, Magic.
Mm-hmm.
Magic always took exception how much I talk about Russia. So he called me a communist and, you know, Stalin and Ivan and any like Russian name he could think of. And so the concept of like a red star and all that sort of stuff was always like, oh, that's cool. I like sci-fi. I'm already called a communist. And I believe in socialism for the greater good of all the people, to take care of people. And I'm reviewing books, and no one else has chosen Redstarreviews. And I live in Birmingham. The flag of Birmingham City is a red star. So all that just kind of went together, and I was like, okay, Redstarreviews it is. I'll just throw this in there free of charge. I used a hashtag. It's like, well, it's Instagram, so I'll do Bookstagram. And I looked at it thinking I was really clever. And thousands of people had already done that. And I found the book community on Instagram, and it's been
I thought
going
he was
forward
about to
ever
tell us
since.
he was the first one to do hashtag Bookstagram.
I wrote the
I
hashtag
wish,
was the
I
first
wish.
one. I was the first post.
I was the first one that I knew of.
How many books do you own, and how many of them have you not read yet?
Mean questions to ask a reader. So I tried doing a little bit of mental mathematics right beforehand because I was prepped that might be a question. And I own somewhere in the nature, we'll just say between 1,500 to 2,000 books.
Wow.
That's just physical books. That's not counting ebooks or audiobooks because that I'm not going to count all those right now. Because my iPhone is littered with ebooks that I have never yet read, but they were on sale for 99 cents, and that was too good to pass up. I've not read about 400 of those.
That's a really good ratio, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Normally, if I own it, I've read it. Then I'm a poly reader, so typically I'll have between 8 to 12 books going at any one time that
Holy
I'm actively
smokes.
reading.
Yeah.
So that kind of helps me go through the list a little bit more.
That's crazy. I can't do that. I'm like solely focused
Me
on,
too,
on
man.
one at a time. And I can slam a book out pretty fast if it's really interesting, but I can't do 8 to 12. I would mix up so many characters. I'd be putting books. Yeah.
Well, see, the downside of it is it does take me longer because I'll get distracted. But the good news is, like, that helps me with any mood that I'm in because I'm very much a mood reader.
By the way, congratulations on creating human beings. You've got 2 kids, right?
I do.
Right.
I have a baby girl and a baby boy, and they are the joy of my life.
But let me ask you this. Before you had children, because I know there's a difference now. How many books a week did you read or a month? You know, give me some about how much volume of books you read.
I can give you the annual analytics because
Okay.
Goodreads, I love Goodreads, and it gives me like pages read, books read, and all that. If you go back to the few years before I had children, I was reading about 150 books a year.
Wow.
When I had kids, suddenly that dropped down to about 40.
Wow.
And now,
Thank kids.
They do it to you.
You also read comic books, am I right?
I love reading comic books. Yes.
Yeah, your freaking episode on pre-Unity Valiant Comics. I
Very
sent
niche.
you. I sent you. I know, like not everyone's into that, but I sent you a picture of the money you made me spend because it was like a week after that podcast episode. I walked into
Yes.
some kind of old flea market and they had like $100-something worth of them, and I bought them all. If you, since we're talking about comic books, if you could like, if someone said, "Hey, tell me one graphic novel that or comic that I have to read," which one would you say?
Well, I know most people are going to say Watchmen, and I'll just go ahead and say you can completely skip Watchmen and you're going to be okay. It's a good one, but if you skip it, it's okay. If I had to just hand anyone a comic book to read that they probably have not ever read, the one that I'm going to try and direct them to is actually an independent comic book. It's called Thieves and Kings. It's by a guy named Mark Oakley. It's a self-published one, so it can be a little bit harder to find. But its artwork is a combination of fantasy and manga that just is extremely unique to his books. And it's a tale of a magical city and the city's thief that lives within it. And you see the thief growing from a little boy up into a man. And there's so much backstory between the childhood and adulthood that's just all interwoven. And he'll have whole pages of just prose with one beautiful piece of art and the prose all around it. And then the next pages are like 10 sequential arts.
Wow.
So if you ever
really
are just
cool.
looking for something off the beaten track, Thieves and Kings by Mark Oakley is going to be amazing and blow your socks off.
This always happens. I've got a lot to look up after talking to Jacob.
You're gonna send him another picture of all the money he's
Yes,
spending.
exactly. I asked Carl to grab a random book. All right, and I grabbed a random book. I don't know what he grabbed.
Okay.
And we're going to hold them up, and here's what it is. You have to, and this is going to be really difficult. Hopefully, you've read them both. But as much as you read, I think there's pretty good odds.
It's one of those 1,100 books.
Okay, exactly. Times his life.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have to pick one that gets to stay and one that was that was never written. My book that I picked was The Shining by Stephen King.
Okay.
And my book that I picked was Jaws.
Having read it, I would say at first keep The Shining because I've never read Jaws. But I would say actually keep Jaws because the movie is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And that the music from the movie, John Williams took just 2 notes, da-da, da-da, and I mean, terrified everyone. I gotta say, keep Jaws, because even if the book, I've heard the book sucks, so that's why I haven't read the book. The Shining was actually one of the few Stephen King books I read. And the number one thing I realized with Stephen King, and this might make a lot of people hate me, he desperately needs an editor that takes about 1,000 pages of his books and chops them out. The man's
That's what
never
he
met a
said.
word he doesn't like that he's going to shove into those books.
That's what
You
you
know-
say all the time, yeah.
God, people are gonna hate me for saying it, but I totally agree with you. You know, I read it, and it felt like I had the paperback of it. It felt like I was carrying around a box of Pop-Tarts. It was so big.
Yes.
And I'll never. There was like a whole chapter about the history of some warehouse, and then there was a whole
Yes.
chapter about the background of someone met on a plane, and I was just like, why? Why is
Like
this
there's a
in
whole
here?
chapter about a bottle of Coke that rolls down a hill and hits a guy in the foot before the clown takes him away. And it's just like, I don't need to know that bottle of Coke existed and was built in 1942 and it's glass blown.
Can we geek out about Lord of the Rings a little bit? Because
Sure.
I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan,
Yeah.
but Carl is like huge into Lord of the Rings, and I know you've read them multiple times. So you got any questions you'd like
I'm
to
actually
ask?
rereading them right now.
are
Ironically
you?
speaking about rereadings, yeah. I decided it had been years since I had read the actual book, so I went ahead and just actually downloaded it to my phone and started just going ahead and I made it through Tom Bombadil, and I had to set it down for a little while because I hate Tom Bombadil. But I'm gonna pick it back up and start going again.
Why do you hate Tom? Is it just because Tolkien never really fleshed him out and gave anybody a real answer for who he was, or do you
Can I ask why anyone would like Tom Bombadil?
I feel
mean,
like people like the mystery of Tom. I feel like people like because Tom was the one who held the ring and wasn't affected by it. He put it on his finger,
so in
right?
other words, Tom was the most selfish bastard in all of Lord of the Rings because he could have taken that ring Ring, walked right up there, destroyed it, walked away, no damage done to him or anyone else.
Yes, selfishness aside.
Frodo wouldn't have had to have all those like moments of.
I know, right? I know.
Boromir would not have had to have died. I mean, so many things could have gone right.
But then Sam wouldn't have made me cry carrying Frodo up the mountain at the very end.
Well, you see, here's the thing: is Jacob actually did change my mind on this, because I remember I was one of those guys that read the book, and when the movie came out, I was like, "Where was Tom?" And everyone's going, "Where was Tom?" And I remember you said like, "Why? Who cares?" And I was like, "You know what? You're right. Like, why did we need Tom Bombadil?
He adds nothing." But my thing with Tom Bombadil, almost everybody I know who tried reading Lord of the Rings, this is back when the only movies you could get a hold of were the cartoon movies by Ralph Bakshi that were just like, he was on drugs, but they were amazing.
Sure.
Like when people were reading the books, they're like, man, I tried reading those books, but I got bored and I stopped. I'm like, you got to Tom Bombadil, didn't you? They're like, yes.
I was in 5th grade when I read The Fellowship of the Ring. And the part that I was so ashamed, I was remembering being 5th grade, and I think I cried because I couldn't make it through it, was the Council of Elrond. I had to skip over that chapter. Yeah, I couldn't make it through the Council of Elrond.
The movie made that a lot more interesting and action packed than it actually was.
It really
and
which is the beautiful
brought that to life and the great gifts that you have now of Boromir. You know, it just from that gift. Council,
a lifetime of memes.
My Lord of the Rings experience, I remember. I read the book also before the movies, but I remember going to Walmart and buying the first book in paperback and reading it at home. And when I got done with it, it's the first time this has ever happened. I was so anxious to know what happened. Walmart used to be open, some of them still, all night long. I went to Walmart, bought it at 1 o'clock in the morning, went out to my car, turned that little light on, and read the first chapter of The Two Towers.
People like Tolkien and Brooks and Moorcock and Tad Williams helped establish a high fantasy field, and now we have such a renaissance in grimdark fantasy because they're able to take those tropes and turn it on the head. But if nobody had created those tropes, nobody would know what they're writing about.
That's true.
And this is why you got to go to Redstarreviews podcast.
That's true.
Everybody.
Yes.
Yep.
Seriously, it's a great podcast. Hey, before we leave, let me say two things real quick. One, you are the reason I read Dune as well, and I have to say thank
you. Highly
for
approve of that.
I've read Dune 3 times now, and which is an accomplishment.
Hey,
pat me on the back for that.
It is.
So a personal story about Jacob. Okay, he's a really great guy. Like I said, we were friends. We actually lived together in an apartment with a couple other guys for a couple months, probably about 6 months back in the day.
Yep.
So long ago. It was like 99. Like, what wasn't it? Something like that?
99 or 2000.
Somewhere around there. Okay. And I'll never forget, I knew Jacob. We were like best friends, but I knew him. I thought he was a nice guy. But I knew for a fact he was an amazing guy when this happened. I got a sunburn, okay? I don't know if you remember this, but I got one of the worst sunburns of my life. And it was one of those where you're just like, blisters popping and stuff, and I'm like, oh god, I can't move. And I was in this little tiny bathroom in our apartment trying to put aloe on my back, and Jacob was like, you know what, come here. And he just did it for me, and I was like,
what about,
you know what, touching my back has got to be gross. But this guy, he looked past that and did it, and I thought, thank you, best friend. So he's a good dude.
I am one of the kings of the paleface tribe, so I burn easy, so I know how it feels. And when you can't reach all your back and that's burnt, I wasn't going to leave a brother just hanging like that. You just can't.
If I never said thank you very much, and also thank you for being here. Please don't forget to go follow on Instagram, Redstarreviews. His podcast is on. You can get like Apple iTunes or anywhere you can get a podcast. Redstarreview podcast. And thank you very much again.
We appreciate it, Jacob. Thank you.
Y'all are welcome. Very good to talk to you. Thank you for having me on. I truly appreciate it.